Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I at least attempt to answer your automotive questions and sometimes butcher your names. Last time we upgraded to the new video location and hopefully better video quality. Today I'm trying to upgrade the sound as well, so I really can't tell until the broadcast is over till it's better, but it's my hope that it is and it doesn't sound like I'm in the bottom of a garbage can. Anyway, a few things before I get started. I will be taking the questions from the Google Plus event on my Google Plus page, and you can go there and post questions throughout the show, which lasts about a half hour and probably goes a little over than that. I try to get to as many questions as possible. If you are watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those questions being posted, therefore I will not be answering them. Apologies for that in advance. You can always visit EricTheCarGuy.com. There are resources there. I suggest you start with the FAQ page to get answers to your automotive questions should you not get on the show or should you have questions outside of when this show is posted. I'm wearing a cool t-shirt from my friend Eric Tonday's channel, Velocity Labs. I was working with him last week when I was in Atlanta. He's really cool. I'm going to post a link in the description to his channel. Anyway, on with the show, as they say. And I just start at the bottom and work my way to the top. We are going to start with Bobby Greger, who has a 2008 Trailblazer. It acts like I'm slipping on ice when it's dry out and the brake pedal vibrates. Could it be a bad brake booster? Master cylinder, no ABS light is on. It only does it when slowly stopping. I've actually experienced things like this, in particular with GM vehicles in the past. And you are correct. I believe it is the ABS that's activating when it shouldn't be. Many times this is a result of perhaps a wheel speed sensor that is beginning to go bad that isn't necessarily setting a code for the ABS. The ABS uses the wheel speed from each of the wheels on the car. And if one or more of those wheels is not traveling at a speed that's anticipated based on the speed sensor reading from the speedometer, well, it activates the ABS. So if a sensor is going bad, what happens is it sort of gives a false reading to the ABS computer. The ABS computer then activates ABS, which sounds like what you're dealing with here. Now, to find this sensor, best way is with a lap scope, which I'm almost certain you don't have access to. Outside of that, I struggle to figure out a way to try to find bad ABS sensors other than with something like a lap scope. A DVOM, I don't think it's going to be fast enough for you. Possibly a scan tool if it's capable of looking at ABS information, but I doubt it. Unfortunately, you may have to wait until it fully goes bad. At this time, I can't think of a way outside of a lap scope which gives you nice waveforms that you can look at and say, aha, that one's sort of acting goofy. But just know that it's the ABS activating and it's not something wrong with your base brake system. At least that's what I believe based on your description. I'll work on trying to figure out a way to do some kind of diagnosis of ABS sensors that are sort of bad but not completely dead yet. Moving on, Anil Rampal. Hey, Eric, other than trying fuel injector cleaner, are there any procedures, tools that you can recommend to diagnose a stuck open injector? I heard of pulling the injectors with the rail and pinching the return line and putting the key in the on position to see if there's any fuel coming from the injectors. Should be none, right? Thanks in advance. Okay, I don't recommend removing the injectors. It's not necessary. If you suspect an injector problem, what I recommend starting with is a power balance test. And I have a video on this that I'll post a link to in the description. Oh, by the way, I should have said at the beginning of the program, there's always additional information in the description of the video. I just need a little bit of time after the show concludes. I'll mention things throughout the videos, things like that I might be referring to. Those links will be down below. So please check there if you have questions. Okay. Getting back to your question about finding a leaking fuel injector, what I start with in that case, if you have a cylinder miss, is which I'm assuming you're trying to deal with, is a power balance test is a great place to start. If you have individual coil packs, it's, in my opinion, probably the best case scenario. All you do while the engine is running is disconnect the coil packs one at a time and listen for the RPMs or feel for the RPMs of the engine to drop or stumble. It should. If you disconnect the coil pack and nothing happens, the engine continues to run as normal, it's not likely that that cylinder is contributing. and therefore there could be a problem, not necessarily with the fuel injector, but it could also be an ignition system problem. From that point, you have to go further to find out if you have an issue either with fuel delivery or spark delivery. But the way you nail down a particular cylinder is with that power balance test. Now, if you don't have coil unplug and you're unable to unplug individual coil packs, another way to do this is by disconnecting fuel injector connectors. It does the same thing in essence. It cancels out that cylinder. In fact, I believe Ford has a strategy on their scan tools where you can access, and it does a power balance test for you. It goes through each cylinder and actually measures the percentage of RPM drop based on the entire engine and the way it runs. So it gives you a pretty good indication if a cylinder is operating correctly. That said, their strategy, I believe, is to disable the fuel injectors in order to perform that test. You can do the same thing manually, and therefore you can find that problem cylinder. Remember, if you disconnect the cylinder either through ignition or fuel, and the engine continues to run exactly like it did before you did any disconnecting of anything, that cylinder is not contributing. But if the RPM does drop, that's an indication that that cylinder is probably working. You cannot rule out mechanical. So many people come to me with these theories and things, and they completely rule out a mechanical problem, thus a compression issue, either through a valve that's not sealing or piston rings that aren't sealing. Basically, a cylinder that is not sealing, it's not able to mechanically produce the power that it needs to produce. That's something else you need to consider. But finding a problem cylinder, whether it be a compression problem or otherwise, in my opinion, the best way to do that is with that power balance test. Now, to answer your question as far as figuring out if a fuel injector is leaking, fuel pressure gauge is what you're going to need. You're going to need to hook that up to the system in whatever way you can do that. I've got a video on checking fuel pressure that I'll post a link to in the description. But you and I cover this also in that video. But to try to find a leaking injector, let's say, what you do is you turn the key on, you pressurize the fuel system, and then you block off the return and the supply line to the fuel rail. And if you can, some of those lines are steel braided and you can't necessarily do this, and some are returnless, so they've only got the supply line. But if they have that, at least you can find out if an injector or some part of the fuel system is leaking down by observing the pressure after you turn off the ignition. And there's no longer, the fuel pump is no longer working. It should hold pressure for at least 30 minutes. If it starts to drop off quickly, you've got a leak there somewhere. Now, finding that leak, well, that becomes another challenge. If you've done a power balance test and you found a particular cylinder that's an issue. Also, if you pull that spark plug out of that problem cylinder and maybe it looks really clean or perhaps even wet, that could indicate that there's a fuel leaking into that cylinder. But there's a whole process that goes into this. You don't try not to go into performance diagnosis with an assumption, and also never forget about mechanical. Performing a compression test when it comes down to it is not a bad idea if you're looking at an engine miss or an engine that's performing poorly. Also, the timing, and I'm not so much saying ignition timing, because honestly, ignition timing really doesn't go out. It's usually some mechanical issue, especially if you have like a timing belt or something like that that is contributing. So don't go adjusting the ignition timing. Just make sure that it mechanically is in time. Sometimes the timing belt's a tooth off or something, and that can cause performance issues. I had that problem on my Subaru. I had a hesitation in it, and the problem is that the timing belt was 2 teeth off. And when I put it back together and everything was lined up correctly, the thing ran great. Once again, don't rule out mechanical. I need to move on. Pedro I. Riviera Negron, I hope I got that correct. We'll just call you Pedro. Hey, Eric, greetings from Puerto Rico. My question, the cleaning relearn throttle body procedure on Hondas is the same for new models, specifically the 2012 CRV model. Can you elaborate on this topic? Thanks, my good friend. Take care. Hello, Pedro. All right, Pedro, your car is a 2012, so it's old enough, but here's the thing. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, hey, Eric, I wanted to clean my throttle body, especially on newer vehicles that I believe that has a drive-by-wire system, my forum is literally littered with people who have cleaned throttle bodies only to find that the vehicle does not run, will not start, will not idle, or idles really high, or some issue after they get done cleaning that throttle body. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing here, but it seems like, well, obviously I see people that have problems, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have done this that have not had any problems. But more often than not, people that attempt to clean drive-by-wire throttle bodies end up in a pickle. And that pickle is that you have to go through an idle relearn procedure, and that may involve proprietary scan tools that you have to plug in, having to tow your vehicle to a dealership in order to get this kind of thing done. Worst case scenario. Now, and this is why I'm always loath to do these recommendations as far as cleaning throttle bodies, but normally I do cable operated throttle bodies, no problem. Just make sure the engine is off, when you're cleaning the throttle body. You can spray a bunch of cleaner and stuff down in there that can flood the engine and all that kind of stuff, but I've actually done a video on this, and I spray a little cleaner inside, I open the throttle plate, and I clean around the area where the throttle plate comes in contact with the throttle body. I do not remove the throttle body from the engine. That, I think, is one of the common denominators in those issues that people have after the fact. So try to avoid that if possible, and just clean the area that you can reach. Usually you can reach it. It's only, a couple of millimeters inside the throttle body that there is any kind of buildup that will affect the throttle plate itself. A lot of times it's the idle control valve that is sticking or is having an issue, and that's a whole other can of worms. But if you're not having any kind of performance issues and it's idling fine, don't mess with it. Don't go in there thinking that you're going to perform a maintenance procedure, because you could end up at the dealer with having them do the idle relearns procedure. So be very careful when cleaning throttle bodies. It seems like a simple thing. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody thinks, it's just a simple maintenance item. But once again, my forum is littered with people that have tried to perform this kind of cleaning and have had issue. In fact, I did a Google search trying to find, maybe a method out there in order to do it safely, and I found that my forum post, or there was a forum post on my forum about that came up almost #1 in the Google search. Just saying. So proceed with caution, and I don't recommend removing it. And if you do, a little bit of cleaner and a rag wiping the inside along the throttle plate, that should do just fine. You don't need to get in there with a toothbrush, fine-tooth comb, and just don't do that, because you could end up with more problems in the end. Keith Price, hey Eric, thanks for all the work you put into your channel. Very helpful stuff, and we really appreciate it. Question, what is the Eric the Car Guy approved method of de-sludging an engine, or what can I do to prevent sludge buildup? Scenario, I purchased a used car with an engine notorious for sludging. I have no maintenance history to reference, and I'd like to keep it running for a long time. At 97,000 miles, it hasn't seized yet, and I can't really see inside the valve cover without removing it. I was planning on running synthetic oil in shorter intervals for the first couple of changes for maximum detergent effectiveness. Is this a good idea, or will I just be wasting my money? Thanks again, Eric, and have a great day. Have a great day yourself, Keith. Okay. You have to be careful, especially with engines that are very sludged up on the inside. If you clean too much, and I've done this in the past, and I even think I mentioned it on one of my live shows, where I ran kerosene through. And this was an 84 Thunderbird, and like you took the valve cover off, and there was like a mold of sludge inside on the top of the engine of the valve cover. So it was like I didn't take the valve cover off at all. In other words, extreme sludge situation. Use kerosene to clean it out. Well, it cleaned it out really well. So well, in fact, it took all that junk, sent it down into the oil pan, and it clogged the oil pickup and blew the engine. So you have to proceed with caution here. As far as preventative maintenance, regular oil changes. I cannot stress enough how regular oil changes prolong the life of your engine. The seals, sludge buildup, the way the engine wears, all of this comes back to regular oil changes. You don't have to use synthetic, just conventional oil changes at reasonable intervals. 45,000 miles, 3,000 miles, honestly, to me seems like a bit much. And even 4,000 miles seems like it's a little soon. But, especially on modern engines, they have really good PCV systems. The tolerances are different than older engines. They're not the same. 3,000 mile oil changes, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, is a way of selling oil changes. As far as synthetic oil goes, 8,000 miles, that's what I set mine at when I do synthetic oil changes. And on vehicles with high miles, there is high mileage oil that's available, which is a synthetic that has special detergents and friction modifiers to deal with aged engines. It also has seal conditioners to help those seals maybe come back to life a little bit. As the oil gets old, it becomes acidic. It forms, as it combines with combustion gases, it forms sulfuric and carbonic acid. Those acids attack rubber seals, and when they do, they tend to harden up, make them really brittle. and therefore they don't seal well. So they need to be somewhat pliable, and those like high mileage oils is specifically formulated to help keep those seals pliable. I've actually gone and talked to the engineers at Valvoline and also Mobil, also Pennzoil, all those people. They all say the same thing. Regular intervals, and they all spend a whole lot of time in R&D and making their oils the best they possibly can. So I'm not going to sit here and say this brand is better than this brand. I know that they're all working their butts off to make the best oil that they possibly can, hands down. But it comes down to, you know, the science that they put into that stuff. As far as the interval, as far as how much it cleans the inside of your engine, that's really subjective in my opinion, because each engine is under a unique set of circumstances. And it's really hard to say what exactly is going to work with an engine that's already gone past its regular intervals and is sludged up on the inside. So as far as bringing one back, and usually a good indicator, if you're looking at a used car, is you pull the oil cap off and look at the bottom of the oil cap. That's inside the engine. Now, it's not way down under the valve cover or anything, but when you take an oil cap off, that's usually a pretty good indication of what's inside the engine. If you open it up and it looks clean, most likely the rest of the inside of the engine is clean. If there's a little bit of sludge buildup, there may be a little bit of sludge buildup inside the engine. It's usually a window into what's happening inside that engine. So I hope that answers your question. And I'll post a link to that interview I did with Valvoline that was very informative about this stuff. Steve Z has a 1996 Ford Thunderbird 4.6 automatic transmission that also has a braking problem. During normal braking, the car stops fine, but during hard braking, it takes a long distance for the car to stop. I had to do some hard braking at an intersection recently, and the car ended up in the middle of the intersection when it finally stopped. Almost felt like the car's brakes failed. I checked all the brake pads, brake fluid, and everything looked good. Are there any other areas of the braking system I should be looking at? Thanks. Sorry, I got some kind of, it's allergy season here, and the trees are blooming today. Yay. Anyhow, okay, I've run into this problem before, and for me, it was the friction material itself. In other words, the brake pads were of a material that honestly didn't work so great. In fact, my preference is for ceramic brake pads. They seem to have good wear. They seem to be quiet, and they seem to stop well. So there could be something going on in that regard. But I'll say if it's braking normally and it stops fine, but then you put real heat to it and you put a lot of pressure to it, maybe you got a caliper that might be sticking that's not compressing enough. And to try to figure that out, you know what you might do? You might, and I found these, in fact, I have one from Harbor Freight, one of those infrared temperature sensors. Go out and activate your brakes a few times, come back to the garage, and then check the temperature of the rotors. If there's a significant difference in the temperatures of the rotors from one side to the next, you most likely have a problem. But if they're relatively the same, then they're probably okay. You know, that they're producing equal force and equal pressure. I actually have, now that I think about it, somebody gave me a brake force meter, which measures the amount of force that's applied when you step on the brakes. And I've never had cause to use it. I've never used it, but it sounds like something like this might be a good way to start. But if you came to me in my shop with this problem, the first thing I would say, well, the first thing I would do is look at the brake pads. And if they looked smoked, you know, because if a sticking caliper or something happens and you look at the brake pads, there's like this sort of white crust on the outside. They look different. They don't look like normal brake pads. They look cooked. And you can even remove them and see like little cracks on things on the inside of them. And that's an indication that that brake has gotten really, really hot. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for evidence that things have gotten too hot. And that can cause the brake fade. That's what you're talking about. But, you know, honestly, I'd look for a good quality set of brake pads, try those and see if that stops better. If your rotors are questionable, many times, like the modern thought is to just pad slap things and not do anything to the rotors. And actually Honda, when I worked for them, that's what they recommended. They didn't want any machining or anything done. They just wanted pads replaced. However, the rotors also play a part. And if you start with new rotors and new pads, that's the best case scenario. Now, machining can be done, but within tolerances. And honestly, not many people machine rotors anymore. I'm fortunate to have a really cool brake lathe that I can do it and just try stuff. But even in the past, I've tried that and have failed, so to speak, in that sense, because it just didn't work out. All right, Ninja Mag. has a 2012 Ford Fusion with 60,000 miles. When braking, sometimes the wheel wants to move a little, and also I think I can hear the driver's side rotor and a pulse pattern say at a certain spot on the rotor. Should I get new rotors or just get someone to machine them like yours to groove down? Also, what kind of pads do you prefer? Ceramic looks like the best, but my dad did not feel on some he got. He goes for price buying. Okay, ceramic pads are more expensive. I know ceramic pads will last way longer, but will there be a lesser chance of warped rotors? Is there a lifetime for ceramic pads? I sort of covered this in the previous question as far as what my preference is. And like I said, my preference is for ceramic pads in most cases. But the wear is good. And sometimes they produce a little too much dust. But as far as their characteristics and things, it's technology from the aircraft industry, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, brakes are pretty important on the airplane, especially if you're getting towards the end of the runway. Anyhow, as far as the type of pads causing your rotors to warp, that really has to do with your ability, the rotor's ability to dissipate heat. One of the reasons why people don't machine rotors anymore is because they're kind of manufactured almost just at tolerance, and any wear that happens sort of puts them below or so close to tolerance that there's no point in machining them. And I've just seen brake rotors in general have just gone down as far as the amount of meat that they put in them. They don't make them as serviceable as they used to, and therefore they have a tendency to warp more. Anytime you machine rotors, you take away metal. Whenever you take away metal, you take away the rotor's ability to dissipate heat. The whole point of brakes is turning speed into heat. And if it's not able to dissipate that heat effectively, it can warp the metal, and that's where you have the pulsations. Another thing that could cause brake pulsations is something that's referred to as flash rust. Say it rains, or you live in a really humid area, and you park your vehicle for sometimes just overnight. And you look through the wheel and you can see the rotors, and you see that there's a rust buildup on the rotor just after sitting overnight, or maybe even a week or a few days or whatever. But underneath the pad, it's all clean. You go to apply the brakes, and what happens is you'll hit that clean spot every time the pad comes around, and it'll feel like a pulsation. Now, sometimes it'll clean itself up. Sometimes it's so bad that it actually creates a pulsation. Once again, going back to the cheap metals and rotors these days. So, you know, there's a number of factors that come into play as far as how rotors warp. But as far as the pads, I prefer ceramic pads. They may cost you a little more, but honestly, you know, if it gives you good results and doesn't give you trouble, and you don't have to buy it twice. That's what happens with cheap parts and cheap tools and things. If you buy cheap things, sometimes you end up buying them twice, and that's not really, you know, economically wise. Babble-a-boo. I think I got that right. Hey, Eric. Is it possible I've ruined my alternator by charging the battery without disconnecting the terminals? My battery is at about 11.5 volts when it's running. I've checked the wires, but everything seems fine to me. Okay, as long as the vehicle isn't running when you're charging, you're not going to hurt the alternator. Now, if the vehicle's running and you're charging the alternator, or charging the battery, that's a little bit different. But 11.5 volts while it's running is way too low. I mean, something is not allowing enough voltage. Well, either the alternator isn't producing enough voltage, or something is not telling the alternator to produce voltage. So there's a problem with control. That's a possibility, or it's the alternator itself. In my experience, like 8 times out of 10, it's the alternator that's the problem. But you also have to check your battery connections, your terminal connections, your wire connections, check the alternator itself, the connections there. All those connections need to be good, because electricity needs to follow a path. If there's a break in that path or too much resistance in that path, it can't go anywhere. So connections are equally important whenever you're dealing with any kind of electrical issues. Based on what you're telling me, I mean, a vehicle should be charging above 12 volts with everything on. I've done a video about this. In fact, like somewhere in the 13 volt range with nothing on, 14 volt really, with nothing on is where you should be. So it sounds to me like you need an alternator. Whether or not you ruined it by charging the battery, no. But here's the thing. If you have to jumpstart your car, it's never a good idea to charge the battery with the alternator of the car. That can overheat the alternator, the voltage regulator inside it, and that can damage an alternator. So you never want to try to charge a battery up with an alternator. If you've got a dead battery, like there are times when you have no choice. You're in the parking lot, you got to jump, you got to get home. I get it. But best case scenario, whenever possible, charge the battery up and don't use the alternator to do it. Use a separate charger to do it. and the longer you take to charge it, the better. In fact, I've got a really cool charger from Battery Minder that not only charges a battery over a long period of time, but it also desulfates it. And I've brought batteries back with that thing just by leaving it on the charger for. I actually left it on for a month because these things are actually designed for cars that sit for long periods of time in the garage, like storing for winter. And those things are great as far as bringing back batteries. And there may be other chargers that are equally as good as far as just charging things. But like if you've got the different amp scales on the charger, the lowest amp scale that you can go to and the longer time you take to recharge that battery, the better. All right. Brian Burke has two problems with a carbureted 1984 Accord. Tons of blue smoke out the tailpipe on startups, worse during cold weather. Valve seal replacement did not correct. What do you think it was? During rainy weather, and this is number 2, during rainy weather, car died about 10 minutes into driving and it needed to sit for about 10 minutes, then ran well. I previously removed the big plastic piece under the engine because it was hanging down and scraping the ground. What is the problem? Okay, under number 1, I've covered this actually in other programs just like this. People say, you know, my car's burning oil and I want to replace the valve seals. And I tell them, you know what? I've seen this over and over again. People replace the valve seals and they find out it's the piston rings. Because if you've got an engine that's burning oil, sometimes it's just the valve seals. But I would say 9 times out of 10, it's the engine's worn out. And that's what it sounds like there. It sounds like your engine's worn out. As far as during the rainy weather, it sounds like an electrical issue. Could be a problem with the ignition system. An 84 Accord, that's right around the year where they started using fuel injectors. Some were carbureted. Oh, yeah, yours is carbureted. But it may, I don't know whether that uses a mechanical fuel pump or it uses an electric fuel pump, because I actually had an Accord that was a 79 that had an electric fuel pump that when it rained, it would short out, and there was a problem with that. So that one's a little tougher to say. It could be something with the ignition system. Check, you know, the basics like your cap, your rotor, your wires. In fact, I'll post a link in the description to a video I did about finding voltage leaks, which can give you an indication. You know, you basically spray water on the ignition system and look for sparks. It's best to do it in the dark because, you know, it can be kind of a funky light show. But if you do see the sparks coming out, then that's a good indication you have bad ignition wires or something of that nature. Also, Hondas are super picky about the plugs you use. NGK or Nippon Denso is a good way to go. But, you know, I'd be looking at the ignition system as far as what, you know, the problems you have when it rains. Thomas Standridge, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us on the internet. Is there a time frame for replacing shocks? I have a 2003 Ford Expedition, second owner. I'm nearing 190,000. I noticed my ride quality seems more bumpy and rough. I use the rocking test and the shocks seem to recover quickly. Are there other tests I can try at this mileage that is a good idea, or is there a mileage where it's a good idea to replace shocks? There's no interval that I'm aware of for damper replacement. I'm going to call them dampers because that covers shocks and struts because they're virtually the same thing. Here's the thing on shocks and struts, or dampers we'll call them. I look for leaks. The way this works, or the way they work, is there's oil on the inside. There's a disc that travels through that oil with some small calibrated holes, and that causes it to move slowly in both directions, dampening the suspension. Now, over time, the seals that hold in that fluid may go bad and cause the shock strut, or we'll call it damper, to leak. Once that fluid leaks out, that damper is no good anymore. If the outside is dry, even if the little dust cover thing is all rusty, but if the outside is still dry, it should still be good. I haven't really known them to go bad without leaking. I'm not saying that, you know, replacing them is a bad idea or whatever, but in your case, and I just went through this with the Nissan and the Fixing It Forward project. They thought the suspension was garbage, and I looked it over, and yeah, the dust boots and everything were trashed, but the suspension itself was totally dry. There was no leaks anywhere. I replaced the tires, and the ride quality improved like nobody's business. And I've said it before on this program, and I've said it in other videos. Your most important purchase for the vehicle is the tires, and that's because they affect the ride quality, number one, fuel economy. They also affect, what else? Fuel economy, rolling resistance, which goes back to fuel economy anyway. And then the first line in the suspension. So nothing affects the overall ride quality of a vehicle than a new set of tires. So you might want to take a good look at your tires. If they're old, dry rotted, cracked, then, you know, of course you want to replace them. But and here's the thing, don't cheap out on tires. Buy the best quality tires you can afford and get 4 of them. I'm tired of hearing people argue with me about putting tires in front or back. If you have 2 tires, and getting back to that video about that whole thing, is it better to put good tires in the front or the back? Every tire company, or just about every tire, yeah, just about everybody says put the best tires on the back, and that's to maintain stability control while you're driving at speed. So to prevent oversteer. So you got to take a turn and the back end goes out on you. And you have the good tires on the front, none on the back. However, on the day I did that testing, under the conditions when I was testing in that video, I couldn't steer that car or go anywhere, anything with the old tires on the front. Extreme example, okay? But that was just in that situation. But commonly, if you can only put 2 tires on, put them on the back. However, that's not going to help your ride quality. Put 4 tires on, because I said at the end of that very video, it's always best to put 4 tires on your vehicle. And that is your, like I say, most important investment, so that you'll get the most bang for your buck out of a good set of tires. So don't be afraid to spend money there. Moving on. In fact, let's see. Oh, yes, lots of people posted questions, because initially I was spending more time on the questions because there weren't a whole lot of questions posted today. But I'm going to rip through really quick. And I think there was, yeah, when I started the show, that was all that was up. So I'm going to grab a couple of random questions here to try and round out the show, because usually I do, well, I don't usually do this for half hour. We usually go for a few more minutes. All right, Clinton Erickson. Hey, Eric, just wanted to let you know that the famous Saturn died finally last month after 10 years of ownership. I purchased a newer vehicle, a 2014 Nissan Versa Note 1.6, 39,000 miles with a CVT transmission. My question was, how reliable are the CVT transmissions and how do they work? I've read reviews about my vehicle before I bought it, and everyone said that Nissan has mastered the CVT transmission. What are your thoughts? Honestly, I don't have a great deal of experience working on CVT transmissions. They weren't as common when I was, you know, a day-to-day type technician. As far as how they work, traditional transmissions, and I've got a video about this, what's inside an automatic transmission, use clutches and bands normally to go from one gear to the next. And there's a gear set involved, either a Sun gear set, or Hondas and some Audis also use almost like a standard transmission gear set. And the clutches on the inside, or the bands, basically activate in order to shift gears. That's why there's a definitive first, second, third shift, because they have gears. CVT transmissions, basically what they do is they don't have any gears. They have 2 drums on the inside, and those drums are expandable and contractible, and they have a band that goes around the outside of both of these drums. So one is larger and one is smaller to start with. And then to change gear ratios, they change the size of those drums so that there is no shifting that happens. And I know people that have had these and they're like, well, this is the coolest thing. You never have it shift, and it always seems to operate in the right RPM range, because the job of the transmission is to basically multiply torque and transmit the torque through the rest of the drivetrain. And it does that traditionally through gears. But think of a 10-speed bicycle and how you got like a set of sprockets on the front sprocket and a set of sprockets on the back sprocket, and they change in size incrementally to change gears. The same thing happens in a transmission. However, CVT transmission has a variable gear set. So there is no, you know, gears on the back here, gears on the back there. There's just, like I say, a drum on the inside that gets bigger and one that gets smaller to change those effective gear ratios in order to multiply torque and get you down the road. Without getting through a protracted discussion about that, that's the long and the short of it. But there's plenty of literature out there about those transmissions you can look up on the dang old internet. Gerald Brandon, my 97 Ford F-150 4x4, I replaced the front pads of my truck and realized the rotor was warped. The pads were worn out on the inside on both wheels. I assume that means uneven pad wear. I saw a vid you put out on that problem. When I replaced the rotors, what do you think? Drilled or slotted or stocked? Well, I'll tell you right now, the reason why your inner pad was worn more than the outside pad was because of a lack of brake service. And what I mean by that is periodically it's a good idea, you know, even if your brake pads aren't worn out, to go in and clean and lubricate everything. And in doing so, that makes it so the pads can move freely. If you've got an inside pad that's worn more than the outside pad, it's almost always some binding of the caliper that is the problem. Not necessarily that the caliper's bad, but that those things, those slide pins, those things that allow the caliper to move freely are not doing so. And therefore, instead of releasing like it's supposed to when you let go of the brake pedal, it's sort of staying partially applied, and it usually happens to the inside pad. So periodic maintenance will help prevent that. As far as what rotors to use, I mean, if you're Johnny Speed Demon or something like that, or you just well, you know, if your performance applications are really the only place where drilled or slotted, but you can't those are not serviceable, so you got to replace them, and they're way more expensive. Stock is cheap and it works just fine. It was engineered to work that way. So unless you want to spend more money and you think it looks cool or whatever, I can't see that it's necessary, especially on a 4x4 truck. I mean, unless you're like doing hill climbs and you're having to go downhill really fast. That stuff is designed to help the brakes dissipate heat more. As I said earlier in the program, brakes turn speed into heat, and the better they're able to dissipate that heat when they're no longer being used, the more useful life you get out of them. D. Campbell has a 2000 Mercury Grand Marquis that he has a spark plug stripped and it will not come out. What do I do? Oh, geez. You know, that's a bad situation no matter how you look at it. And it just, it's probably going to end in you getting a cylinder head or taking the cylinder head off and taking it to a machine shop to get it rethreaded. I've tried in the past to replace, stripped out spark plug holes with thread inserts, and I've had some success, but it's not a permanent repair. The machine shop does it the best. And if you can find a cylinder head that's a 2000 Grand Marquis, I wouldn't, put it past being able to find something like that in a salvage yard. Try pull apart. I was just there last week and they have tons of those things. You go out and pull it yourself, and I think you can get a cylinder head for like, $40. I don't quote me on that. I don't remember what the pricing was for each and every engine part, but you can go out there, find a good cylinder head, pull it off there, and away you go. So, that may be an option, a salvage yard cylinder head at the end of the day. Or like I said, call up a machine shop, find out how much they would charge. Hey, Eric, since changing, Hey, Eric, since changing long overdue old transmission fluid, the new fluid has the possibility of the transmission going into shock and failing. Would changing partial amounts of fluid, like changing 3.5 quarts if the system holds 8 quarts once every 5 to 100 miles until most of the fluid has been changed, prevent the shock from happening? I've actually written about this on my website. It's in the FAQ section under transmissions. I get asked this question a lot. And basically what it is you leave the fluid in there for a long period of time. As I talked about earlier about automatic transmissions, there's clutches and bands that activate the different components in the transmission. Those clutches and bands have friction material very similar to the brake pad material, or probably even more closely aligned to clutch material. It will wear out over time. And as it does, those particulates get suspended in the transmission fluid. So the transmission fluid, in essence, might become a little thicker over time. And automatic transmissions depend on very small passages and very, sort of a delicate balance of a bunch of different things to happen at just the right time. And the fluid is extremely important to the operation of the automatic transmission fluid. So therefore, if you leave it in there for a long period of time, it comes saturated with this particulate matter, and then you go through and you put new fluid in. And there may be a little bit of gunk in there too. You go and you drain that out and you put new fluid in. It doesn't matter if you do it, over time or what. The damage is done, in essence. The new fluid goes in there, it flows a lot better, it doesn't have that particulate matter, it activates the clutches and everything differently. Also, there's less of those clutches and bands because of the wear that I talked about. The writing's on the wall. It's a crapshoot. I don't know of any way to bring back an automatic transmission that hasn't had its fluid changed in a really long time. It's roll the dice and just be prepared for a transmission in the end. I mean, that's the best advice I can give you. And as I said, I've written about this in that FAQ section. Let's see. Steve Z, what are your opinions about changing oil on a new car? Should you change the oil on a new car immediately or under 1,000 miles? Or is it okay to just change the oil at a regular 5 to 8K mile intervals? Just wondering, because when you rebuild an engine, they say to change the oil after 1 to 200 miles to get all the assembly lube and materials out of the engine. Thanks. No, you don't want to change it soon. There's look in the owner's manual. Different manufacturers have different ways of doing this, but particularly on an engine that's broken in, the zinc that's in that oil to start with, sometimes they use special oil and things. You want to leave that in there as long as possible for break-in, and it's more than 500 miles. It's not 1 to 200 miles. So as far as changing oil in a new car, consult your owner's manual and drive it. Sometimes you have to drive it in a certain way in order to get the engine to break in properly. But there are additives in that oil sometimes that are there specifically for the break-in period of the engine. And if you cut that short, then your engine could wear prematurely as a result. Always consult the owner's manual. I mean, there's a gajillion manufacturers out there and a gajillion engines, and they've done extensive testing on break-in and how to do it properly. Consult with them. Always consult with them. Jesse Silva, I didn't mean to skip you, has a 99 A4 with a 1.8 turbo. You lucky son of a gun. I'm planning on upgrading my connecting rods and pistons. Question is, if my car has good compression on all cylinders, do I need to send it off to be bored out, or can I just hone it and get standard size piston rings? The car has 139,000 miles in the motor. I really just want to hone it myself. Well, let me tell you something about going fast. It's never easy, nor is it cheap. So the more you try to cut corners, the more chances you have of having a problem. Now, my question to you is, what's wrong with it? What are you trying to accomplish? And by putting new pistons and rods in there, I mean, what exactly are you trying to get out of that? And that's what you need to think about. So many people focus on the engine for performance. In fact, people have been bugging me for a while now about getting my Fairmont done. When are you going to pull the engine? When are you going to pull the engine? I'm starting at the differential. And the reason I'm starting at the differential, because I'm building a complete car for performance, front to back. That involves the gears that I'm going to use. That involves the tires I'm going to use, the tire size that I'm going to go with, a whole bunch of things. The first thing we rebuilt was the manual transmission. Paul Cangialosi came and helped me out with that. All these things play a part in transferring that power. There are plenty of places that you can get performance gains without digging into an engine, especially if you're not familiar with digging into an engine. And in that particular model, Germans are pretty picky about their engines. You get in there and start changing stuff, man. For some reason, I think they engineer them to rebel against such things. They sort of reject it. It's like a bad blood transfusion. So weigh your options carefully. Do your research. Find out what performance gains you're going to get by that. If you just want pretty connecting rods and things that you're never going to see, what's the point? Really consider, if you got a turbo, find out how much boost it can take and crank the boost up until it blows up. I know that sounds Eric, why are you telling me to blow my engine up? Well, what I'm telling you is do your research and find out where you're going to get the performance gains you're looking for before you start buying parts and doing things like this. As far as your particular engine and application, I really can't say. I'm not an expert with those. I would consult with a machinist, particularly one that's familiar with that engine, to find out what performance gains you can get where. And good luck finding them. Good machinists are getting harder and harder to find. Anyhow, we have gone 15 minutes past. All right, one more. John S. Hey, Eric, I have a 1993 Honda Integra that I race in an amateur series with the B18C engine. It uses a lot of oil. Honestly, that's not uncommon. Not uncommon for this engine, I know, but this seems excessive. There's no leaks. Plugs look good. I've taken the intake manifold off, and it's as dirty as I would have thought. What are your thoughts on an oil catch can from PCV to intake? Thanks in advance for your advice and videos. If you're racing a car, oil catch can is a great way to go. Now, whether or not that's going to help you from preventing that, if I'm not mistaken, it was a piston ring issue on those engines. And pretty much, I think the only way you're going to solve it is to rebuild the bottom end, and that in and of itself may be a temporary solution. But an oil catch can, if you're racing it, heck yeah, go for it. And actually, that's a good engine to do that kind of stuff with. In fact, go for some low compression pistons and put a turbo on there and have some real fun and see how that happens. Yeah, just throwing that out there. Anyway, we've been running my mouth for 45 minutes, and I'm sure you're sick of listening to me. As I said at the beginning of the program, if you have automotive questions, I'm going to ask you to head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. Once again, give me a few minutes to put the links together in the description. That's where you can go if you need automotive information, that kind of thing. Google+, Facebook, Twitter is where you can find me socially. I want to thank you for watching. And the next show will be in 2 weeks, which looks like it'll be the 30th of March will be when I'm back. I'm going to check the sound to see if that was actually a win with the microphone here. And if it was, perhaps the quality of these videos will get better. It's my aim anyway. Anyhow, I want to close this one out as I do with all of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and once again, thank you so much for watching.